Welcome back to the podcast AI Searched, where we talk about AI and machine learning in every industry. So excited to have Leonor here with us today to talk about her experience both as a CEO and in the education industry and how she's developed through the last 20, 30 years actually, and how now they're incorporating AI into that. Hi Leonor, how are you doing today?
Hi, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, so welcome to have you, and I'm excited to talk about all of these things. So you recently took on the role of CEO at Yellownest, but you have a huge background in education and transforming education with tech. Tell me a little bit about that. How did you get into that?
Well, I think, so I started when I was CEO of Montessori Global Education. I was really interested because one of the first things I was told when I, joined was that, Montessori is anti-tech. And I thought, well, hang on, but first of all, tech is here to stay. And secondly, it doesn't really align to who Maria Montessori was, because she was a pioneer and she adopted new technology as it came into her life, as she lived from the end of the 19th century to 1952. So I started looking at tech, and I started looking at how tech affects us in the education space, which is what led me to launch my think tank when I left Montessori, and my think tank started in January of this year. I spent most of last year developing it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that for sure a little bit later.
But I'm really interested because I think that we are on, and I've been saying this for years now, I also like history, and what I find really fascinating is that we are at this transition phase from industrial to digital, and it very much parallels what was happening when we were going from agricultural to industrial. So there's a big shift. The only difference being that the full adaptation of the Industrial Revolution took about 100 years. This is taking not even decades. It's super fast, and I think it's the speed at which it's happening. And of course what we're not doing is preparing children for this world that we're in. So this is really where my interest has started to develop in trying to understand what tech is, how we use it, where we use it in education, what are the implications for us as human beings, and this whole and this we've got to accept it's here. It's not we can't
how do you
go backwards.
Like, what processes would you take in order to tech in general, but also just AI and computer vision and ML that's coming very popular now and it's developing extremely quickly now. How would you would you already include that, in kindergarten or in schools? Like, how would the process of implementing that to both satisfy parental health and, obviously there's a lot of parents who are against computers in school and parents that are pro computers in school. Where's the balance here?
Well, I think the balance is about I think there are two reasons why parents are against it. The first is because I think parents don't understand it. They don't understand and that's normal because again, the speed, if you think at ChatGPT, for example, was 2022? It's hardly, it's 3 years ago. So the speed at which this is happening is so fast that even the most, tech savvy parent is going to have difficulty in keeping up with the technology. So there's an element of fear of not understanding. But I think there's also an element of, as a society, we've not really thought through what it means for us. And therefore, we try to sort of think, no, we must protect our children from it without understanding that what we should do is teach the children how to use it. We teach children how to cross a road, which we wouldn't have had to do when we didn't have cars. So it's the same thing. When cars came, did we ban cars? No, we learnt that we had to teach children how to cross the road.
Yeah, I think
I was actually
jaywalking was born then.
Exactly. I was actually taught how to cross the road. I was taught how to wear a seatbelt. It was a massive campaign when I was young because people didn't wear seatbelts. Massive campaign to teach people and children how to use seatbelts. So I think it does need to be taught even as early as kindergarten,
Yeah.
because it's there and it's around us. And it's much better, in my view, to teach children how to use technology, AI, internet, social media responsibly, for them to understand what it means as a tool, than to hide it from them and then they're exposed to it, because they're going to be exposed to it.
Yeah,
They're going to be exposed to it.
one day, whenever, you know.
Well, they're probably going to be exposed to it earlier than you think.
Yeah, it'd
because
be interesting to look up statistics. I know it's the same kind of restrictions for, drugs, alcohol, gambling. What are the restriction rates of that? And then how restrictive is that? And then how does that actually affect teenagers or young adults who see it for the first time?
Yeah.
I don't know the statistics on that.
I don't know the statistics, but let me give you a personal kind of, it's a personal story. So my family is Spanish, and I was brought up in the UK. And so in my family, it was perfectly normal for there to be alcohol, wine at a meal.
Yeah.
And when we were young, we were, again, because it was the way that we were brought up, we would have a teeny little bit of wine with a lot of water, and that became with a meal. So I grew up knowing that this is what you had, that alcohol was something you had as a meal, as part of a meal. My friends who were British, who didn't have that culture, for them, like drinking when they became teenagers was like, oh, we've got to go and drink, because it became such a big, and I could never understand it, it because I'd been brought up with it, and I was like,
for you, it's part of the ritual.
It's part of the ritual.
Of the meal and the family,
exactly.
And the social
what
culture.
Is this? Why are we doing this? And I think there's an element of, it's much better for children to understand and learn in a safe environment what this means than to be exposed to it, because they will do. If they go to, you may be able to stop your child, from seeing a screen or having an iPad or a phone, but are you going to stop all of the children? Because someone's child will have a mobile phone or an iPad. So, there is an element of having to educate children that this is the world we live in, and teaching them critical thinking is essential, I think, in my view.
Yeah, I think that's a way to combat, and I think that's what you said. If we bring technology into the classrooms from the beginning, are we going to be able to skip the initial addiction and attraction part of the screen and continue into that? This is just a tool, and here's the critical thinking behind that tool. Let's use this tool just like we would use, a hammer or a saw to build to build furniture.
I mean, nobody thinks that calculators are dangerous and have a problem with, but when calculators were first introduced in schools, it was like, oh, children are not going to be able to sort of do maths anymore. Well, children still do maths. They just use calculators.
Exactly. Yeah. Last time I try to do things in my head sometimes just for fun, but
and laptops. I mean, who doesn't use a laptop to study now? And do homework. I mean, again, it doesn't stop children learning. It's just a different type of learning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about Yellownest, your new role, and what are you guys building?
Okay, so Yellownest is a company that works with, it's in the UK, it's a UK-based company, and in the UK, childcare is actually the most expensive in Europe. And what it does is it provides a salary sacrifice benefit for parents to be able to sacrifice part of their salary and use the tax savings to pay for childcare. And it's a company that, and of course, for us to be able to properly manage that and administer that, because we act as the agents, as it were, so it's the employer, the parent and the nursery, the kindergarten. Technology is really important. How we manage the technology, how we manage the data, how we are seamless. And so we're very interested in looking at AI and looking at technology and looking at how we can use technology for good. But what we've realized is that, and what differentiates Yellownest from others, is that we're still very human-centered. And that kind of human-centered use of AI and technology is really at the heart of how we operate. So, Yeah,
it's incredible. I'm excited to kind of see that launch, and I hope it spreads also to to the EU and other countries in Europe.
Yeah, there are other countries that need it, so yes, definitely.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Even here, I think it could be something useful since childcare is hard to, it's definitely much more affordable than the UK, but I think it's maybe hard to enroll your children because there's not as many spots available.
Definitely.
And I'm really I've been kind of looking into a think tank, and I've actually know a few people who are participating,
sure you
so
do.
that's exciting.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, and what are your future plans with your think tank, and how that's going to grow? Kind of, you said connecting creative and technical people to find creative solutions.
Well, that's right. So I launched the think tank in January, and I'm still going to be running the think tank. I mean, that Yellownest know that. So the idea and it's actually registered in Croatia.
Yeah.
The idea of the think tank, as you say, is to look at the need for reforming education in this digital world. And we launched with a roundtable in London, actually, on creativity. Okay. And how is creativity being impacted by technology? Because in a world where art can be produced by machines, is it really art? So that was really kind of the question we were asking. And we came up with a white paper with some recommendations about actually understanding it's a tool, and again, that human-centered approach was really important. The white paper, we sent it to the EU. They now want to have a discussion with us about our recommendation. It was presented to Lord Vasey at the House of Lords 2 weeks ago. And we want to build on that. So I'm going to be having a round table in June, on the 6th of June, again looking at the same issue of creativity, and this is going to be in Croatia at the House of Cartoons, which is a museum to a very famous cartoonist called Otto Reisinger.
Okay, yeah.
It's in the Old Town. And we're co-hosting it. And what we're going to be doing is actually asking the question, or making a parallel. So during the Industrial Revolution, there was a response from artists towards industrialization by looking at more homemade crafted things. So in the UK, we had the arts and crafts movement. In the rest of Europe, we had Art Nouveau. And here in Croatia, we had, I think it's called the Vienna Secession.
Okay.
And so it was like a backlash or a response. The backlash sounds negative. It was more of a response about going back to looking at things that were handmade, that were crafted by hand. So my question to the roundtable, to the panel we're going to have on the 6th of June is that going to happen now?
I think it already is happening.
I think it already is, because I've been looking at some things like slow art, and in some countries I think they're putting things like labels not made by AI on certain pieces of art. So again, I think it'd be really interesting. I want to look at what are the parallels, and I'm looking not just at art but also design. So we're going to have designers, we're going to have artists, we're going to have an art historian, we're going to have a brand specialist on the panel having that debate, and it'll be a follow-on from the one that we did in London, and we'll also have a white paper, and we'll sort of continue to do that.
What is the EU's response? I mean, you're still waiting to actually meet
We're going to
with
have
them.
a meeting with them, but they said, we really like your recommendations, we think it's really important, and we want to discuss how we can make these a reality. We're also going to be doing a mini conference with Crow AI on the 27th of May. And that is going to be looking at EdTech and I'll be on the panel with that as well. But we'll be looking at the EU AI Act, particularly around EdTech, and looking at EdTech and what is the role of EdTech in education. And again, that'll be a mini conference that we hold on the 27th of May. So those are the next two things that are going to happen in Croatia.
Yeah, very exciting. And I think that's really important also, especially with art and culture and design. I think that is something that you kind of learn at a young age now, because we have so much access to new tools. So I think you children, I don't know, I've let my nieces and nephew grab my iPad and start drawing, and they love it. So who knows what they're going to do in their lives.
Exactly.
But at 10 years old, they had a good time trying to create artwork digitally. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that goes back to hand. I think in my personal life, I also see like a lot of things that I like to go back. Maybe I used to sew, obviously with the sewing machine, don't have a sewing machine anymore, unfortunately died. And going back to building things from scratch with my hands, and I think that's fun, but also value the fact that the machine is 10 times faster.
But that's a very good, but you've made a very good sort of point there, because, we used to sew by hand before we had a sewing machine.
Yeah.
So is something hand sewn, has that got more premium than something that's made by a machine? And that was a machine.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of an interesting debate to be had there about the value of things and how we value things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and I kind of dabbled in it for fun, because as a designer in a background, and I hadn't done a lot of clothing design, but I have been testing out a few softwares, Browsyware and Clo 3D, just to see what they're working like. And I love the fact that you can draw a 2D pattern in Illustrator or any other digital designer on their platform directly, and it's going to make a 3D model of how that clothing would hang, which, of course, I think in the past has been a lot of trial and error. That leads to a lot of waste.
Exactly.
And I think it was very cool when I was testing out these softwares just, for personal research, that I can actually, create like a model of my body with the measurements already pre-put, design, a t-shirt and throw it on fake Tanya and see how it's going to fit, and be able to make adjustments on the 3D model that will then be implemented into the 2D pattern that can be printed out and sewn on a machine, or in that case, usually it's sent to a factory to be sewn. For massive production, but for a personal use, for something fun, I thought it was a really cool software to test out for AI features.
Well, I think that's a really important point, because I think what we have to say is that, so again, just going back to the historical parallel, so looking at the arts and crafts movement in the UK, William Morris was a very big figure in that, and William Morris made these wallpaper and sort of designs. And at the beginning, yes, it was very much about hands and, handcrafted things that were very expensive for an elite. But what happened? You actually, even though it was a response to industrialization, it needed the industrial process to make it widely available to everybody, which is why even now you can buy a William Morris wallpaper, even though he's been dead for, 100 years or so, because of the industrial processes that existed. So gradually, this sort of, no, we're going to go against that, it became part of it.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to understand. Is that what is going to happen now? We don't know.
Yeah. Do you think that might also have a reflection compared to the cost of things, the cost of AI and the cost of machine learning tools? Now, a lot of them are actually free, or they have some sort of free trial, so it's very available to the public. But at some point, even ChatGPT now has a subscription.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to kind of force some people who aren't willing to pay, or can't pay, or schools that don't want to have licenses for certain AI, to kind of go back into kind of a revolutionary arts and crafts movement?
It's a very good point, and it might do, and I think we have to find that balance. We also have to understand, and this is something that we don't necessarily talk about so much, is we need to understand as well what is the cost in terms of global resources and energy of all of this, because it's interesting. I was a judge on some AI awards, and I was at the award ceremony in London in February. And one of the things that came up was that there is this, at the moment, we're very binary. You have like these techno-utopians who think that that's it, it's going to change the world, it's going to be so much better. And then we go completely opposite, which is people who are completely against it. And I find that quite frustrating, because I'm probably in the middle, where I can see some of the value, but I can also see some of the negatives. And this is, again, why I created the think tank, because I wanted to have a more balanced view of what this does. And one of the issues that we do need to talk about is energy use. If we're all using this wonderful technology, where is all this energy coming from? What does that mean for us in terms of, is it countries that can afford that energy use going to be more ahead just because they can afford the energy use, or
create different energy streams? I think what's interesting, though, is there is a big, I would say, hype and discussion about the sustainability of AI tools. And as we said, these ChatGPT, those are 3-4 years old. ML tools are very kind of young in the sense that they're overall consuming especially generative AI tools that are extremely consuming. But also, we touch a lot on that now, but actually the sustainability of social media, so Instagram uploading videos every day,
takes
YouTube
more
videos,
energy. Takes more energy.
Takes so much energy.
Yeah.
And then people filming, 8-minute videos about how ChatGPT is unsustainable. And yes, of course, I think the last published rate was 10 times more energy consumption than a Google search for ChatGPT. But how many Google searches are you doing to find the content you need compared to one ChatGPT query?
Exactly.
I think they said, I don't remember the exact number, but the please and thank you that you add to the ChatGPT is actually costing billions of dollars to OpenAI. So this is kind of interesting points. I think we're so young in this, and I would say we are all, humankind right now is a beta tester for AI.
Absolutely, it's a beta tester, but again, that happened with industrialization, and I think the issue is, it's the speed of which it's happening. It's not that, and we're not thinking about it, and we're definitely not educating our young, who will be the future users and the future programmers, to understand what it actually is. So they're having to discover all of this by themselves. And so as a result, because we're not teaching them how to use it properly, we're not teaching them how to critically think, what is happening is we're seeing predominantly the negative side. And that's really down to us as adults, that we should be teaching children how to do this. I mean, it's the equivalent of, putting a toddler in a car and then expecting them to drive well. Well, no, they're going to
some time.
They might drive, but if you don't teach them how to drive, they're not going to drive properly. So I think it's the same thing. We tend to blame the technology rather than say, okay, well, hang on. Are we actually teaching people how to use it properly? And I don't mean technically. I mean in, if you read something, does it make sense? How can you check this? Are you actually, don't just take everything for granted.
That's that critical thinking aspect.
It's that critical thinking aspect, absolutely,
And I think that's going to be kind of the key to the future.
It's absolute key. But also trying to remember that it's about socialization as well. I mean, it's about being human. This is what the whole thing about the think tank is. It's saying, we have to be more human. Well, what does that mean? And a part of that is, how do we socialize? We're having to learn how to socialize in a different way because, and I've done this, I remember I was out to dinner the other night and I was sort of smiling because at one point we both looked across to a table and there was this, I felt very sorry for her because there was this young woman who'd obviously dressed up, it was a date, and they were both on their phones. And I was thinking, is that how you're communicating now? Where's that socialization of sort of learning how to and then we blame the phone instead of saying, hang on, no, we shouldn't be blaming the phone. We had a very interesting situation in Spain last, because my family is Spanish, where the whole country,
it was all over the news.
There was no light, so there were no phones, there was no internet. And one of the things that people said was, actually, we quite enjoyed that because it reminded them to just connect as humans.
To sit in the park and just enjoy being alive.
And talking and, dancing and singing and just, and it just completely, and doing things together. And it was really interesting. And then again, and I was sort of, talking to when the lights came back out and I was able to connect with my family, to make sure they were all okay, which they were. I thought it was really interesting that we blame the technology, but we're the ones that use the technology. We're the ones that choose to be on our phones when we're on a date, rather than talking to the person opposite us in the restaurant. So
it's definitely it takes a lot more self-control. It takes a lot more personal strength, to sit alone in a coffee shop and not be on your phone, or to, I don't know, even greet your neighbors. I think a lot of people in our building, they don't even say hello anymore. They're just typing away. I think it's just something that was normal in the past, and now people are very kind of closed off.
But we choose to do that.
Yeah,
That's
and
not
we've
the
done it to
technology.
ourselves.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
technology is not making us do that. I mean, it can be nudging us towards it, but we have to. So someone, again, I was talking to someone, and they were talking about emails, and it's true. You know, you get an email and you get a notification, and you feel you need to answer that email straight away. And it actually can be a productive. It can kill production. It can be non-productive. And I just said, well, just switch the notifications off. And they were like, oh, can I do that? And I was like, yes.
You have to answer it like a text message.
You know, I know. And I said, yes. I said, I don't have notifications on. I look at my emails when I choose to look at my emails, when I have time to look at my emails. But I don't prioritize that. And so there's an element of, this education of ourselves of saying you don't have to answer things straight away. Just because it pings doesn't necessarily mean to say it's urgent.
Yeah.
No.
It's going to be a really key part of the future.
It
that
is.
Personal self-control in order to allow ourselves just to live our lives and have technology be a tool and not let that tech
But that's education.
overtake.
And not just education of young people, it's education of all of us, of saying, it is exactly that. This is a tool. You know, my car doesn't tell me where to go. I decide where I go.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same with the technology. The technology shouldn't be telling us how to behave. The technology doesn't have the sentience to decide that. We decide, but we're making it the decision maker. Well, we're doing that. We're doing that. It's not. So don't be anti-technology because we're doing that.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah, makes I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I think you need to stay true to yourself as a human being and your natural instincts, and let the technology be.
And then it is an amazing tool. Then it can do incredible things. Then it can really be helpful to your life because you're choosing to use it for the purpose it is actually being created, rather than allowing it to dictate what you should be doing.
And I think with children, it's definitely a struggle because they see it taking over adults' lives. When you sit in a train or even on a bus or something, everyone is on their phones. So how will a child not copy that?
Exactly.
And I think that's really important then also in the education system. So actually in schools, in kindergartens, to teach that it doesn't have to consume your life.
No, exactly.
And that you can use it for good, and that there are certain processes, and not just take society as a whole as, you know, I would hate for my child to sit and watch a date where two people are just on their phones and think of that as normal. I would hope they would have enough critical
I thought that was rather
thinking.
sad. I really thought that was really sad. And I was like thinking, wow, you know, she's gone to all this, I mean, she looked amazing. You know, she's gone to all this effort to dress up, and he's not once looked at her.
Oh, no.
You know, he's been looking at his phone.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, so she was looking at her phone as well, but still.
Living separate lives in their own bubbles.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
You're welcome.
It was so wonderful to hear all your insights and all the incredible life experience that you've had. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes. You can watch AI Searched on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Let us know what you think in the comments.